The Detroit Tigers play another televised spring training game, so we're going to break that game down as well as do a player preview on Joey Wentz. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, March 1st, 2023. Thank you for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. All righty, we are back. Glad to be back yet again. The Tigers played a spring training game. Ow, got some in my eye. Tigers played a spring training game on Tuesday afternoon in Florida against the Toronto Blue Jays. And I think that there's quite a bit to talk about involving that game. So we're going to take the first segment, maybe even bleed into the second segment a little bit, but we'll take the beginning of the show and recap the previous day's spring training game and just news and notes from that game. If it's not televised, there will be a lot less to talk about. If it is televised, there will be a lot more to talk about. And then after that, we will continue our player preview series, and that's probably how most of the rest of spring training is going to go. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit of World Baseball Classic. I almost said Winter Baseball Classic. The WBC coming up here soon, so we'll have all of that info and such as well. But that's probably how the rest of spring training is going to look. So, speaking of that, the Tigers do lose a ball game to the Toronto Blue Jays on Tuesday. I had somebody ask me over the weekend, I want to say. No, I think it might have been yesterday. Regardless, someone asked me why I was not really caring about the wins and losses in spring training. And I would just say, I don't think you should either. I don't think anyone should care about record or wins and losses in spring training. Like, yes, the Tigers had a horrible inning in that game against Baltimore. Like, guess what? Odds are pretty good. Nobody that pitched in that inning is going to be on the Major League Baseball team. You know what I mean? Like, it's really hard to really, for me personally, I guess, to care about wins and losses in spring training. I care about individual performances, position battles. Absolutely. It's vital for those position battles and open roster spots for the taking and such. But I really could not care less. I could not care less. Yeah, I said that right. About wins and losses in spring ball. So just want to start with that. But the Tigers do lose this ball game. Kind of tried to come back a little bit at the end, but it fell short. Some news and notes not news and notes, some observations, that's the word, that I had. Austin Meadows' swing, I think, looks a million times better, really, than it ever did last year. And we talked about that a little bit yesterday, so I don't have too much more to add, but it's just something, again, that was very apparent to me when watching the ball game on Tuesday. And I felt like reiterating that point. His swing looks a lot more solid, a lot less flimsy. He looks, I think he looks really good. And I'm really, really excited for what Austin Meadows can put together this season. In the same breath, Parker Meadows had a really nice hard hit ball down the right field line on an 0-2 count against a lefty, which in a vacuum is just one pitch that he did well on, which is, fair enough. And it's very small sample size and whatnot. But last year, he really struggled against lefties. And in that same at bat, he actually went chasing on a breaking ball low and away. So that's something that he's very clearly still working on, is being effective against left-handed pitching. But it was nice to see a hard hit ball on an 0-2 count against the lefty, just considering really as a professional period, he has not hit very well against left-handed pitching at all. So nice to see. Nick Maton, I thought, was borderline the story of this game. Definitely one of two. He had a great game. Full count walk to start off the ball game, had a really good base running, went first to third on a not very it was a ground ball single actually by Riley Green there right after him in the first inning. Went first to third on that, and then Javi Baez sac fly brought Maton home. So really nice base running there. And then in the bottom of the first, had a really nice diving play on a ground ball and then got the runner at first. So really, really solid game for Nick Maton. Now, the biggest thing for him is going to be, can he hit lefties as well? We are very aware that he can hit righties well, but we got to see how he fares against lefties. And we also have to continue to see him develop defensively. I think that there is nothing set in stone or solidified about the third base job right now on Wednesday, March 1st. Okay. But if you were to ask me today, who's got the best odds? What's the clubhouse leader for opening day third baseman? I'd probably tell you Nick Maton. But that doesn't mean that that's not a very fluid situation that couldn't change 3 times from now until Friday, nonetheless, now until opening day. Okay. So a lot of time left, but definitely as it stands right now, I think he's had the homer in one of the non-televised games earlier in the week. So really, really nice start for Maton this spring. Donny Sands, I think, was obviously both part of the same trade there, him and Maton. I think that he was another storyline in this one, not necessarily for the best of reasons like Maton. Not that I thought that Sands was terrible or anything, but Toronto very clearly was down to just run all over him on the base paths. They stole second 4 times just in the amount of time that Sands was in the game, which I think was about half of the ball game. And he got the first one, strike him out, throw him out in the first inning. Really nice play. Beautiful throw. It wasn't the hardest thrown ball you've ever seen from behind the plate, but spot on accuracy wise. Got Bo Bichette trying to steal. And then after that, the next one was also really close, but it was safe. And then the last 2 were nowhere close to anything. One he threw into center field. The other one was honestly not too far off from that either. So really just made it apparent that Toronto felt very comfortable running. I don't know if that was a Sands thing specifically, or if they just wanted to get their players used to stealing bases because they're going to be a lot more aggressive on the base pass with all of the incentive to steal a little bit more. But with that incentive to steal a little bit more, the backup catcher job, I think undeniably how good you are at throwing runners out from behind the plate is going to play a huge factor. And if Sands isn't going to be that guy, that's going to play a big factor in that battle between him and Jake Rogers for backup catcher. And I think really the only way that, because he's not just magically going to get a Lance Parrish cannon, right? So like, I think honestly, the only thing that he's going to be able to do to really force the Tigers' hand and make the team out of camp is just if he mashes in spring. He's just going to have to hit his way onto the roster because I think even post TJ, it's pretty clear that Jake Rogers is going to have the advantage when it comes to maybe not all facets of defense. Sands is a really good pitch framer for whatever that's worth still in 2023. I know a couple years from now that might not matter much either, but I think Sands is key to being on this roster is really going to have to be hitting the baseball, and that framing obviously will come into effect as well. Okay, and Rogers had a homer, or he had a strikeout in this one. But he had a homer a couple of games ago as well, for whatever that's worth. Alex Faedo pitched in this one. I thought that was worth bringing up. His slider looked really good. Still some command stuff, but it's his first inning of the spring, so we'll let it slide for pretty much everybody at this point. And yeah, I was really impressed with how good the slider still looked. Still got some people fishing. When it's located well, that thing, I mean, ever since college, right? Like we remember Alex Faedo when he was a Florida Gator, one of the best college pitching rotations I've ever seen in my life. And he was the ace of that team his draft year. So and it's all really because of that slider and that slider fastball mix. I think slowly, especially as the Tigers get more and more pitching depth, they're probably going to lean and steer more in the direction of Faedo being a reliever, even if that is a multi-inning reliever. But he proved everybody wrong last year and had some really effective starts. So we'll see what happens this upcoming season, but a decent start to his campaign. Okay, I got a few more names I want to bring up, and then we'll get into the Joey Wentz player breakdown. But first, I got to tell you all about our friends over at, you guessed it, FanDuel. It's the midway point of the NBA season, and it is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back. If your first bet doesn't win, you can just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line, point scores, three-pointers made, etc. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine bets for a chance at bigger payouts with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/locked on. That's fanduel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, everybody, welcome back. Segment 2 here, Locked On Tigers. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. So we're just recapping this spring training loss to the Toronto Blue Jays. Another player, that's the word, goodness, that I wanted to bring up in this one was Andre Lipsius. You know, the Blue Jays broadcast team could not say Andre Lipsius's last name for the life of them. But I greatly appreciate the effort. And those are obviously, we're talking about minor leaguers for teams that aren't the teams that they cover. So no hard feelings or anything like that. But it was really funny. He's found some success early on. And Lipsius is a guy that last year I think he fits the Scott Harris mold really well. He just walks a boatload. He has just crazy good patience and crazy good walk numbers. And last year in the mid levels of the minors, double A at one point in the season and for a majority of the season rather, finally found a little bit of success in the balls he was putting in play as well, because the walk numbers have kind of always been there. And so I have always been a huge fan of him just for that reason. I love hitters that walk. You guys know that. And so it's nice for me just to see him succeed early on. He's got a couple of knocks. He went yard, not today, but earlier in the spring. So I'm loving it. I don't think he's going to make the team out of camp or anything, but he also got a look at first base at the end of the game. So maybe trying him in some different positions, raise his versatility. If he can play third, second, first, I mean, that would certainly help his odds of getting on the roster at some point this season as well. So big fan of what I've seen from Lipsius so far. Zach Short, somebody I wanted to bring up. He's been just a topic of conversation for really the entire offseason, because a lot of people were kind of blown away at the fact that he made this roster and, well, not made that he remained on the 40-man roster throughout the offseason, rather. And we kind of talked about it a few weeks ago, if you're like an everyday listener. So just the fact that he draws a lot of walks and is versatile and is a net zero at worst defender at multiple positions kind of fits the mold of what Scott Harris is building, even though I know he's going to have a batting average under 200 if he plays a full season in the majors. I totally get it. I'm not a huge Zach Short is amazing guy or anything, but he does fit the mold a little bit for depth pieces. Now, this is all to say he did not have a very good game on Tuesday against Toronto. And I think that even with all of that being said, and those points that I've made again earlier in the offseason about why I think he's still here, I don't think that it's like Zach Short is guaranteed to be on the 40-man like forever. You know what I mean? Or like, not forever. That forever, yes, but he's not guaranteed to be on the 40-man even on opening day. I guess my point is, if he has a really bad spring training, it would not shock me at all if he was waived or DFA'd or, removed from the 40-man in some capacity. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well, just with the game that he had. And then lastly, I think the only other point I have is Joey Wentz himself. Yeah, Joey Wentz is the only player left. So we'll just transition into Wentz's game on Tuesday against Toronto. And then with that, we will talk about the player breakdown and kind of what to expect out of him this season. So on Tuesday, first appearance of spring training for Wentz. He threw the curveball a lot more than we've really ever seen him throw in a single outing. He threw 36 pitches, and 10 of them were curveballs. Last year, we'll get to his usage when we do the player profile, but last year, his curveball usage was under 10%, and this game was almost 30. I know it's only 2 innings, but still, it was pretty noticeable that he kept going to the well there with it. It was also really well located. He got a lot of called strikes on it, got a whiff on it. Not a single curveball of all 10 was put in play. Only one was even made contact with, and it was fouled off. So that's something that I'm going to really pay attention to as the spring goes on, because I loved how it looked on Tuesday. Loved how it looked. I thought the shape was beautiful. He threw one to Vlad. The one that was fouled off was to Vlad Jr., and it set up a strikeout in the very next pitch when he went heat up, and it was a curveball like at his just below Vladdy's kneecaps, and it was just beautiful, like soft contact, perfectly located, I think. And I really liked the shape and the velo of it today. So if that's what the curveball is going to look like, I'm going to have pretty high hopes for Joey Wentz this season. And so that was my biggest takeaway, easily, was just the curve. But he had solid velo all around. I thought the four-seam fastball, he had some command issues with it, especially at the end of the outing, because he had a shutout. I know only 2 innings, but he had a shutout going through an inning and a third. And then toward the end there, he had a hard time kind of getting out of the second inning. So, and gave up some hard contact with the four-seamer. I think the fastball for him was either missing the zone completely, or it was catching the heart of the plate. He was having a hard time kind of trimming the edges there and shadow pitching it. So that was something that was noticeable. And then the last thing was I liked the cutter as well when it was good. Okay. And I'm like half joking when I say that, but he threw a couple of cutters that I thought were placed horribly, and I think they were just spots that were missed. And he threw a couple of cutters that I really liked. So I think that was his like bread and butter swing and miss pitch last year. So just important to note where that pitch stands as of February 28th when he pitched. So that was pretty much all I took out of it. Again, only 2 innings, 36 pitches. Certainly wasn't an awful performance, even though it was 2 runs in 2 innings. The first inning, he was kind of cruising. I thought he looked pretty solid. But the biggest thing is the curveball. Really liked it. I think with some sequencing adjustments too, because he didn't throw the changeup very much, and he threw that a decent amount last year. So with some sequencing stuff, if he wants to be a primarily like cutter curveball guy that can maybe keep hitters honest with an occasional four-seam fastball and changeup, I wouldn't mind that at all. I think that's a really solid repertoire for him, especially, again, if the stuff looked like it did today. Okay? Cool. Let's get into the breakdown then. So last season, Wentz in 32 2/3 innings pitched. That was it. It was 7 starts. He had a 3.03 ERA. That's an expected ERA of 3.62 and a FIP of 3.54. So a little bit higher than his ERA, but not too much. Still around a 3.5 ERA for the predictive stats there. A 7.44 K per nine. That's a 20% strikeout rate, and a 9.6% walk rate, which is a 3.5, little over 3.5 walk per nine. Looking at his AAA numbers, where there is adding to the sample size a little bit more, in 48 innings, 48 and a third innings pitched in AAA last year, he had a 9.87 K per nine, a 3.72 walk per nine, and a 3.17 ERA. So still really solid, just above 3 ERA, a little bit better strikeout numbers to go with that as well. So if you remember last season for Joey Wentz, he made a couple of starts in May and he got absolutely rocked. And then he came back in September and was lights out the rest of the season. So he had like an ERA over 8 combined in his first 2 starts in May. Gets sent down. They were kind of limiting his just like innings in general as well, just because of the history of Tommy John and whatnot. Went back down to AAA, and we just read off what his AAA numbers were. Then he comes back up in September in 5 starts to end the season, had a 1.73 ERA. Okay, so really solid stuff to end the year for him. Let's get into the repertoire the type of pitches that he's going to throw this year. We'll kind of tie that back into what we saw in his first spring training start as well. And then his role on the team is obviously the big question marks. We'll talk about all of that right after this. All right, everybody. Welcome back. Third and final segment here, Locked On Tigers, talking about Joey Wentz. So last year, he threw 55% of his pitches with a four-seam fastball. It's around 93, 94 miles an hour. It's almost like exactly a league average fastball, velocity-wise, to be honest with you. 22% was the cutter, 13.5% changeup, and less than 10%, it was like 9.5%, was the curveball. Last year for him, the cutter had comfortably the highest whiff percentage of all four of his pitches at almost 40%. Very effective. Now, it's also important to note this is just in the 32 and 2/3 innings pitch at the major league level. So it's not a very big sample size. We also saw, again, the difference between his first two starts and his last five starts. This is averaged out between all of those. And we don't have these awesome numbers for what he did in AAA. So just want to make that abundantly clear. This is still only 32 and 2/3 innings pitched. So take that with whatever sized grain of salt you would like. Okay. And where were we? Cutter, 40% whiff rate, really solid. On the flip side, though, it was also the cutter was also the highest slugging percentage against. So kind of honestly really similar to what we were talking about in spring accidentally, right? Like when it was spotted well, I thought it was a super effective pitch and it got a lot of weak contact. It got some whiffs, but on the flip side, it was also hit pretty hard. I think twice, at least once. I remember there's a rocket off the bat for one of the cutters. So something that clearly is still a work in progress. But again, I think with some command development and just like sequencing matters. So much sequencing matters. So I think that could be something too. I personally, this season, I am looking for him to develop the curveball more. And this is not something I was going to come on here and say before watching his start on Tuesday, to be honest with you. But I love what I saw out of his curveball on Tuesday, so much so that I'm so down for him throwing the curveball like 28% of the time if that's what he wants to do. I thought that it was super, super effective. And obviously, again, with all of these pitches, command is going to matter. And it was working for him on Tuesday for the most part, the curveball specifically. But that will be something that I'm sure he will have hiccups in his development when it comes to command with that, if he's going to just randomly start throwing it a lot more. Not randomly, strategically, but you get what I'm saying. Just a spike in usage can definitely lead to some command stuff at times. So we'll see what happens there. But I would love it. I would love four seam like over half the time, really. I'm down to knock the four seam usage down, honestly, as much as he wants to. If he wants to throw 20% less four seam fastballs, I'm signing off on that. I'm totally fine with it. And I like the cutter. And kind of like what I said earlier, man, like I really am totally okay with him throwing a lot of cutters, fastballs to keep hitters honest so that they don't just know it's the cutter. And then curveballs, a lot of curveballs. And the changeup, we only saw, I think, one changeup on his start Tuesday. And it was also down there kind of with the curveball on usage last year. So we're still waiting to see how much he intends on using that changeup throughout his career. But I mean, as it stands right now, I'm totally cool with cutter, curve, fastball to keep honest, and a changeup once in a blue moon. I'm fine with that. In-season adjustments can happen. If the curveball doesn't consistently look like it did on Tuesday, I'm fine with changing that strategy at some point. But I'm totally cool with that. Last year, he was also pretty solid again. I mean, ERA over 3. Like he really, and again, sub 1.8 ERA in the month of September, like in his last 5 starts. So definitely showed some signs. Now, efficiency was a thing last year. Kind of tried to nibble a little too much at times. Had some starts where he had a lot of walks and then kind of had to tightrope his way out of danger, but also had a couple of shutouts and had a couple of, again, not going super deep into ball games or anything, but I really like Joey Wentz. I always have ever since we acquired him. I've been really high on him. I was devastated when he got Tommy John a couple of years ago, but then there was no minor league season anyway, so I guess whatever. And I'm really excited to finally see like a full kind of hopefully somewhat no innings limit season from Wentz. I want them to just kind of take the leash off and let's see what he can do. So yeah, I totally sidetracked myself there. I apologize. ADHD moment for sure. But he was really solid from both sides of the plate, but was really, really good against lefties. Lefties had a 529 OPS against him last season. And again, his righties OPS was like in this, I think 630 ish. So he was solid from both, but really, really good against lefties, which is something that will obviously have value, especially if he is coming out of the bullpen, which we'll transition to now. That's a professional transition right there. I'm not usually very great at transitions, but that one was solid. I'm pretty proud of that one. The role on the team is easily going to be one of the most talked about things with Joey Wentz this year. We talk about the different directions of that group of Wentz, Hill, Faedo, and Brisky. That four. We talk about that four group of four all the time, and how they're all kind of in a similar boat. And I think that Wentz has a very real chance of making this team. I do. If he was used as, and I said the same thing about Brisky, but I think that there's a role on this team for kind of a sixth starter slash swingman type of pitcher. And I mean, inherently, Wentz is just going to have a leg up on a lot of those other guys because he's a lefty, and Tyler Alexander is the only lefty that's guaranteed a spot in the bullpen right now. So I think that is definitely something that maybe gives him a leg up. If and again, like the ability to have a sixth starter should not go unnoticed. Like that's something that every team doesn't just have the luxury of sometime. They need it in this day and age. No team ever anymore goes 5 starting pitchers and that's just your starting 5 for the entire year. That just doesn't happen anymore. So you need that guy that you can call on if you want to skip somebody in the rotation one time. If they go on the 10-day and they only need to start or 2 out of them, you need that guy that you can go to that's kind of that swingman 6 starter type. And I think that Wentz is certainly trying to compete for that role, along with, as we said last week, Bo Brisky, I think, is in that conversation too. And I think that Wentz and Brisky, honestly, are more so fighting for that role than Hill and Faedo. I think Faedo, again, as I said earlier, they might slowly be starting to look at him more so as a 1 or 2 inning reliever. It's just constant injuries is really unfortunate for him, but we'll see. And then Garrett Hill has the ability to start as well. Did a lot last year, had a really good season in the minors. But goodness, if he's going to throw 97 mile an hour sinkers and 90 mile an hour sliders like he did in game 1 of spring training, then he maybe should be a 1 or 2 inning reliever as well, if that's something that he can really only reach back and access when he's in shorter stints. So we'll see what happens. But I think Wentz and Brisky are really kind of on similar playing fields as far as odds of getting that kind of swingman and 6 starter role. And yeah, look, as far as how much he's going to play this year, I fully expect Joey Wentz to get a legitimate look in the show this year and make some starts as well. A lot of that is going to be dependent on the health of not only himself, obviously, but everyone else in that rotation. That will largely, I think, determine how many starts he's going to end up getting. But I also think that it's just going to matter on how quickly they call him up. If I had to guess right now, I'd say I don't want to put like recency bias too much into it, but I would probably have Joey Wentz on my opening day roster. Not like a guaranteed thing, but and again, we have a month of spring ball left. Like we're not even close to making those decisions yet, but that wouldn't shock me at all. Maybe like a 51-49 as it stands right now. And that's not to say that him and Brisky both can't make the roster as well. And you could just have a ton of long relievers in there with those two and Tyler Alexander. There's a lot of different directions they can go. And I think Hinch has been very vocal about liking relievers that can go multiple innings and give them starts if needed. So having a whole bullpen full of those type of guys, I don't think is an issue with this coaching staff or with this front office. Okay, so yeah, That's kind of the rundown. I would say I am if the season started today, I would put Wentz on my opening day roster, but we'll see how he develops throughout the spring. That this is all obviously very, very fluid, and opinions are going to change somewhat day to day for some guys. So we'll see what happens. But I liked what I saw on Tuesday. I liked what I saw last season, especially in September. That's a pretty decent sample size at this point. He's been solid in the minors pretty much his entire Tigers tenure. And yeah, I think a lot of people are really excited about what Wentz could potentially do for the team this year. So pumped. I'm pumped. So glad to be watching baseball again. I'm like tweeting out, like analysis and player breakdowns and stuff. And it's been a long time without being able to do that. So I'm glad to be back on the grind. Baseball every day. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, thank you for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. For your next listen, check on the Locked On Fantasy Baseball podcast. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, just like us, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, I think that will do it. I don't think I have anything else. I think that's it. We'll be back tomorrow talking about. I don't even know if tomorrow's game is televised or not. I'm not sure what the status on that is. But I know, not especially, but we're also coming up to World Baseball Classic, and so we'll have some players leaving the team at the end of this week to get ready for that. So that's something to keep an eye out for sure. I'm fine with it. Honestly, it gives more players more opportunities at different positions. So we'll see what some of these guys can do around the diamond. All right. I don't know who the player preview is tomorrow either. I pretty much just decide based on what the events of the day. So we'll talk tomorrow. All right. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. And I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.